So in my last video, I went in depth on why the Scarecrow from Batman is my favorite character from any work of fiction. I went over his writing, his personality, his gimmicks, basically every aspect of his character to give you all an idea of just how much this one villain means to me. However, there was one aspect of the Scarecrow that I never touched on in that video, one which I care for so much that I purposely left it out of the previous video so that I could take the time to talk about it right here and now. And that is his design. The Scarecrow, as well as simply being my favorite character ever written, also happens to have my favorite character design ever made, which you will quickly realize is actually a horribly vague statement. The Scarecrow, much like his writing, has one of the most inconsistent designs out of any of Batman's rogues gallery. Most other Batman villains usually have very key characteristics which follow them through most of their iterations, allowing for the characters to be changed with each story, but still keeping their recognizable aspects present. Scarecrow isn't like this. His design gets completely changed all the time, for better or for worse, leading to a massive amount of variations of the character. This can be seen as both good or bad. On one hand, it makes it so the character has less of a visual identity, making it harder for him to stand out compared to many of Batman's other rogues. But, on the other hand, it also leads to many artists and character designers experimenting with Scarecrow, leading to some of the most unique and excellent designs all encapsulated by one character. Through this experimentation, we got designs like The Long Halloween, where Scarecrow had an exaggerated, almost Tim Burton-esque appearance. The Arkham trilogy, where Scarecrow donned a more tactical appearance, giving us what is probably my favorite of his more realistic designs. And of course, we also got what became my absolute favorite design for the character, and the one we'll be focusing on today, his design in the new Batman Adventures. When I say that the Scarecrow has my favorite character design of all time, this is the version I'm referring to. The new Batman Adventures innovated on Scarecrow's design in all the best ways imaginable, creating an appearance for old Jonathan Crane which perfectly bridged the gap between a genuinely terrifying monster and a campy comic book villain. I love this design so much that it went on to inspire several of my own characters in the past, giving it major influence over both my style and taste in characters. But what if I told you that it took us a long time to ever even get to this design? Sure, once we got to the new Batman Adventures, it was set in stone, but the road leading up to this iteration of the Scarecrow was a rocky one, to say the least. Unlike many of Batman's other rogues in the animated series which led up to this iteration, it took the Scarecrow a couple of attempts to properly get his bearings and get a design that the creators of the show, as well as the audience, were generally happy with. And this much is apparent from the moment we take a look at his very first appearance in his debut episode, Nothing to Fear. This episode was the first and only one to star this original Scarecrow design, and when we take the time to look at it and compare it to other villains in the show, as well as what he ends up looking like later, it makes a lot of sense why. I feel like when this episode was originally made, it was trying to pay homage to how the character looked in his original appearances all the way back in the 40s and 50s. It sports all the same characteristics as those old designs, with very little altered except for the additions of a properly visible face on the Scarecrow's mask, as well as his shirt being made a bright red color to make him more visually striking. And you see, while I do feel this design isn't necessarily an ugly one or even poorly made, I feel like it suffers from just being bland. I feel like any good Scarecrow design is one that doubles down on either the more campy nature of Batman's world and characters, or one which tries its hardest to evoke a sense of fear in the viewer. This one doesn't really evoke anything. It's so simple and unexpressive that compared to many of Batman's other villains, it just doesn't stand out in the slightest. Looking at this design, you wouldn't really get any sense of what this character is like or what he does. And even with the addition of the red shirt added on, there isn't really much that's interesting for your eyes to be drawn to when you look at him. And it would seem as though the show's producer, Bruce Timm, would agree with my criticism of it, because he supposedly hated this design so much that he would go back to the drawing board and completely overhaul it, making it so that Scarecrow was the first and only character in the entire animated series to be redesigned. This new design would make its debut in Scarecrow's second episode, Fear of Victory, and if I'm being honest, I absolutely adore it. Scarecrow's second design in this show takes all of my complaints I have about his original appearance and improves upon them in such a way where he becomes so much more expressive and memorable. Not much has been changed in the way of his actual outfit, but he's been considerably bulked up and his face has been completely redesigned. Rather than being a simple and unexpressive burlap sack, his face is now a lot more twisted, with a massive contorted grin and hollow sockets depicting the eyes of the person underneath. I love the way his face looks with this iteration. With the way his smile is shaped as well as the crooked teeth he has poking out of his mouth, it gives him an almost jack-o'-lantern-esque appearance, playing wonderfully into his spooky Halloween gimmick and making it so his personality is properly on display here. As well as these changes, the character has also been given long hair made of hay, which further adds on to his appearance by making his face a lot more eye-catching. By having this brightly colored yellow hay to contrast the deeper red of his shirt, it naturally makes your eyes want to gravitate towards his face, allowing you to take in all the details I mentioned earlier. I feel like it goes without saying that this design was a vast improvement. It doubles down on the more campy and cartoony side of the character, allowing him to fit in better with Batman's other rogues and have more of a visual identity. It's no wonder that this design would be his most commonly used in the animated series, with it being the character's definitive appearance until eventually the show was rebranded and became The New Batman Adventures. It was only then that this appearance would be changed again alongside many of Batman's other rogues. See, when Batman the Animated Series was rebranded as The New Batman Adventures, the show received a bit of a shift in its art style. This shift happened because the producers of the show wanted its visuals to mirror its new sister series, Superman the Animated Series, more closely than it would have if it stayed completely accurate to how the show used to look. This shift led to the redesigning of almost all of Batman's villains, with all of them receiving some kind of small touch-up in order to fit the new style. All of them except for Scarecrow, who rather than receiving a small tweak or minor change to his design, was completely and totally overhauled. With all the praise I just gave to his second iteration, you might be wondering why they would choose to do this. And the answer to that question is a simple one. The Scarecrow wasn't scary enough.
Scarecrow was a character who went through a number of evolutions. Originally, the character was very cerebral. You know, Jonathan Crane was a guy who was experimenting with a fear drug, but there was always something a little bit not too quite scary about him.
The Scarecrow should be kind of scary, and no matter what you do with it, a guy with, you know, a jack-o'-lantern face and Scarecrow clothes is not scary.
And so, in an attempt to make the Scarecrow truly a frightening villain, the producers and artists behind the New Batman Adventures finally hit their stride with the character, creating what I consider to be my favorite design of all time. Like, where do I even start with this guy? Here I was just saying that Scarecrow looked great in his second appearance, so much so that if this design didn't exist, I would view it as his best animated incarnation. But then, they decided to go and create the greatest thing I've ever had the pleasure of looking at. This Scarecrow design does everything right. It still maintains the sort of comic book-esque appearance of all of Batman's villains, while now being a truly horrifying spectacle to look at. His Scarecrow theme has been maintained with this design, yes, but alongside it there have also been new elements introduced. An effort has been made here to make this iteration of Scarecrow resemble something like a hangman, with the noose tied around his neck as well as his ghoulish face making him look like a corpse that started started walking again. Combine this with the black Western preacher attire and the constant black cell shading on the character, and you have a truly terrifying design which constantly makes you question what parts of it belong to Jonathan Crane, and what parts are merely the costume he's wearing. And if you think that's just some dramatic statement I came up with to express my love for this look, no, that's actually how they intended this character to be presented.
So we took a really radical departure and we kind of made him look, we put the noose around his neck and kind of gave him like kind of Western preacher clothes and gave him like this, Texas Chainsaw Massacre Leatherface kind of look, and really had nothing to do with being a scarecrow per se, but he was definitely scary.
He looked like a hanged man who had been cut down and had gone off to terrorize people. We weren't even sure if there was an actual guy in the suit.
It was a conscious decision to make the Scarecrow in this show as ghastly and mysterious as possible. His design here completely relies on the idea of making you afraid of what you don't know, leaving your mind to fill in the blanks of what he could really look like under that mask, and more importantly, how he got like this. You see, with Batman's other villains in this show, there doesn't really need to be much of an explanation as to why they look the way they do. The changes made to their appearances can usually be chalked up to a product of the art style, and their personalities are almost entirely the same. But with Scarecrow, the changes made to him are so drastic that it naturally leaves you wondering how he could have possibly gotten to this point. And funnily enough, this was another thing that the writers of the show were thinking about. Sure, if you watch the new Batman Adventures in full, you wouldn't really know about this, but digging deeper and looking into the history of the show, you actually find out that there were several explanations as to how the Scarecrow went from his original animated series design to what he is now. The first two of these explanations come in the form of a blog post made by one of the show's lead writers and artists, Ty Templeton, the first of which being that the Scarecrow had found himself in a horrible chemical accident, which he would blame on Batgirl after the fact. This explanation would be an interesting one, which would leave it open-ended about whether or not we were truly looking at a mask or a mangled, scarred face. But the one I find even more interesting comes in the form of the second potential origin he suggested. That being the idea that Jonathan Crane was meant to be executed when the noose around his neck snapped, leading him to truly believe that he had died that day and become a ghost which haunts Gotham. This origin gives an interesting and morbid explanation to the noose around his neck, giving it more meaning than simply being a prop meant to make him look creepier. The final explanation given to Scarecrow's new design here, and easily the weirdest, actually came from issue number 5 of Batman and TMNT Adventures. The origin for his design can be seen at the end of the comic, where we see his second iteration from the animated series hunched over a table working away at something. As the panels go down the page, eventually we get a close-up that reveals what he was working on: his outfit in the new Batman Adventures. He created this design for himself after a run-in with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles villain, the Krang, after which he decided that in order to make them afraid of him, he would have to make a costume that was infinitely scarier than the one he already used. Now, because this explanation exists in a questionably canon Ninja Turtles crossover, you should probably take it with a grain of salt, but I do find it interesting how there are so many potential explanations for how the Scarecrow began to look like this, with all of them being possible, but none being concrete. It almost plays even better into the fear factor of the character, with each of his origins almost feeling like ghost stories made up by the people of Gotham to help rationalize who this terrifying man is. Each one very well could be his true origin, with them explaining some kind of aspect of the design, but they're left vague enough where you, the viewer, come to a conclusion about which one fits more. And this interesting little tidbit of lore, as well as the history behind it and just the general appearance, is why this incarnation of Scarecrow is my favorite character design ever made. To me, it perfectly encapsulates everything that makes the character work, and it had such a strong influence over my own taste in artwork that I feel like I'm constantly reminded of it when I work away at my own projects. This design, as well as all the factors mentioned in my previous video and other reasons I've yet to mention, all come together to create who I absolutely consider my favorite character in fiction. I've literally just made 2 videos about him, and I feel like I still have so much to say about the Scarecrow, but that'll have to wait until the future. Until then, I hope you enjoyed both today's video and the last one. I'd be lying if I said I expected the original Scarecrow video to perform as it did with you guys, but the encouragement you all gave me with how the video did was what I needed to really decide to make the one you're watching right now. Batman is the only piece of media I find myself having more passion for than the horror genre, so seeing you all get so excited to see me talking about it has me wanting to do it more on here in between horror analysis videos and my ongoing web series. If you made it this far into the video, I'd like to thank you for watching. Your support of this and all my other content means the world to me, and I hope to see you in whatever my next project ends up being. Goodbye for now.
What in God's name are you doing with my old costume? Clyde.
Oh, right, I am still wearing this costume, aren't I? Oh, yeah, sorry about that. I just got so comfortable in it, I genuinely forgot I had it on. Here, just a second. Ah, there we are. Much better. Now things are back to normal. Okay, wait, the background is still the same. Hey, editor, can you fix that, editor? Yeah, thanks, editor, please, yeah, okay, thank you. Ah, okay, there we go. Now things are back to normal. Alright, where was I? Oh, right, yeah, conclusions. Goodbye for now.